Hi, and welcome to Filmmakers Compass Podcast, a show where we talk about movies and more movies. I'm D-Man, and today I am not joined by CP. Unfortunately, it is a solo D-Man episode, and I'm going to have to hold it down all by myself. But on the flip side, today is my birthday, so I'm pretty excited about just the day. Just having a great time. I'm loving all the messages coming in, so big shout out to everybody, just family, friends, podcast listeners, everybody. I really appreciate all the messages. CP, I saw you shared a photo of me for my birthday, and I appreciate that as well. So I love all the love, appreciate all the love. So thank you so much. Well, to jump into this episode, let's go ahead and discuss our shout outs. So first up, responding to our Ready Player One episode is Ivor. Ivor texted and said, about Ready Player One, I have not seen this movie, which I'm surprised about that, Ivor. I figured you would have seen Ready Player One, or at least read the book. But it sounds like Spielberg is not a gamer, nor did he have one on set, or didn't have a continuity expert around. And to that, I kind of have to agree with you. Even though you haven't seen the movie, it does sort of come across as like, the Oasis, not really as a video game so much as just this virtual world. Games are built on rules, and we know The Matrix is also built on rules, but those rules can be broken or bent. But the Oasis, it doesn't feel like there's any rules. Like anything is possible, and at times that can come across as maybe a little too much. So, Ivor, if you get a chance and you do check out Ready Player One, let us know what you think. It is Spielberg. So, me personally, if Spielberg makes a movie, I will definitely give it a chance. So, next up on our shoutouts is Eric Drucker. Drucker, thank you for sending in a message. He was actually following up on a review that CP did on social media, where CP went to go see Casablanca on the big screen, which, congratulations, CP. I'm sure that was a lot of fun. Instant classic, and one that's held up over all these years, and to see it on the big screen, which I have sort of seen it on the big screen. I watched it all the way back 15 years ago in film school, and we did have a theater on campus, but it wasn't technically like a movie theater. So I've kind of seen it on the big screen, but if you saw it in IMAX, which you didn't say, that's probably incredible. And Drucker, thanks for your comment. You just said, play it once, Sam, for old time's sake. So quoting Casablanca, which is awesome. And then finally, I just wanted to give a shout out to Dr. Rachel Tolles, who actually tagged the podcast and is being featured in a traveling show called The Psychology of Serial Killers. And you can check out that show at Tolles House, and that's TOLZHAUS. So Tolles House, at Tolles House on Instagram. And the show's traveling. She has a podcast as well as social media about serial killers. So if you're interested in that at all, be sure to check it out. And according to CP, it was incredible. So he could talk more about that when he returns. And that actually does it for shout-outs this week. So I'm going to jump over here to our box office breakdown. Looking back at the box office this week, the number one movie was Bob Marley, One Love, with, a total gross of $51 million. And it looks like for the weekend, it grossed $33 million, which is pretty good. That's actually quite incredible. Madam Web was number two, which is shocking given the social media reviews I've seen. Again, this one I did not have on my list to see. I have not seen it. And more than likely, I'm probably not going to see it. I think enough people have seen it by now to convince me that I don't need to go. So maybe on streaming. But that grossed $17 million. Third place was Argyle. This is domestic box office, by the way. Argyle with 5, and then Migration with 5 as well, a little under Argyle. And those are holding up well. Migration has a total domestic gross of $116 million, which is pretty good. I'm assuming for an animated movie, that's not that bad. And then finally, 5 is Wonka, Staying Power, with $4 million, and that has grossed over $200 million. So with Dune coming up and Wonka still in the 5 spot, Timothée Chalamet is crushing it, I guess, at the box office, bringing in some big money for the studios. So I'm assuming he will he will be rewarded either with another franchise or a big paycheck. So keep kicking ass, and I hope Dune Part 2 is as cool as the trailers and the hype around it sounds. So on that note, I just wanted to make note of, I did say I went to go see Bob Marley One Love, and I wanted to talk a little bit about that because I really enjoyed the film. Obviously, the music is great, but I think the thing that stood out most to me from that movie, the performances were great. I guess when I think of Bob Marley, I think of good times or good vibes and smoking weed and relaxing music with your buds. And I guess the movie just illuminated for me what a political figure Bob Marley was. I don't think that necessarily translated all these years later with his image. People sort of associate it with, some of the Rasta stuff, but just that vibe of music. And he was actually a really political figure. He was in exile. He had assassination attempts. He brought together politicians of, dire separate backgrounds. And that was all fairly remarkable. And so to see all that play out in the movie was pretty cool and gave me a better understanding of the artist whose songs I can sing along to, but I didn't really know all that much about. So to that end, I think the movie was pretty important. I will say, if you go, I did, with the accents, like, they're speaking English, but it's with accents, and it was a little hard to understand at times, but you get the gist of it, and so it's not that bad or anything. And while I was at the movie theater, I actually noticed that for the 25th anniversary, Disney, or Fox, is re-releasing Star Wars Episode 1, The Phantom Menace in theaters again in, I believe, May. So I'm pretty pumped for that. And that was actually cool because I anytime, I like right here is Return of the Jedi. I went last year. And sorry, for anybody listening, there's a poster behind me of Return of the Jedi. But I got to go see Star Wars in the theater last year, and it looks like it's going to be 2 years in a row. So I'm pretty pumped about that. Now, what I wanted to talk about on today's episode is something that I can't really talk about when CP is actually here. And I figured that was best because if I'm by myself, if I'm going solo, I should probably I should probably have a discussion with myself that, wouldn't be better if CP was here. So I don't know if you guys know where that's going, but of course we're going to talk about Star Wars, and specifically Disney Star Wars. Now, these are the movies that CP hasn't seen, and one of them is The Last Jedi. So I haven't really gotten into The Last Jedi on this show too much, probably in a joking manner, or maybe brought up a few scenes or stuff in past episodes. But I wanted to dive a little bit into why it's so divisive, even after all these years since its release, and why Disney made some of the decisions they made surrounding The Last Jedi and then eventually Rise of Skywalker, and maybe what I would do a little bit different. So this isn't going to be a bash session or anything. I mean, I will say The Last Jedi, I do give a tip of the cap to the fact that I feel like Rian Johnson was at the very least trying to do something. Where The Force Awakens was very derivative of A New Hope and kind of original trilogy Star Wars, I think a theme in The Last Jedi was let the past die. And to that end, Rian Johnson kind of throws it in fans' faces when Luke tosses away his lightsaber, or he even actually makes mention of it when R2-D2 shows Luke the hologram of Princess Leia, and he's like, that's a cheap trick. That's a theme in the movie. And I think, what he was trying to do was trying to show fans that Star Wars can be more than just rehashing the old stories over and over again, which I don't know exactly if he was speaking directly to J.J. Abrams, because I can't imagine it was George Lucas. George Lucas made the prequel trilogy, and that's nothing like the original trilogy. So I'm assuming it was specifically to J.J. Abrams, and J.J. took it that way and retconned the shit out of The Last Jedi in Rise of Skywalker. But it was one of those things that came across as very divisive. As fans, we love Star Wars. So to say let the past die and throw the lightsaber away was a little smack in the face. I think fans got kind of upset that, he was willing to sort of say, like, let's forget about old Star Wars and let's focus on sort of taking this in a new direction and building something new. And to that, again, I applaud him. I think it was admirable to try to do something like that. I think you just got to do it in a way that doesn't necessarily upset the fan base, while you're doing it. So, I think another element that, sort of remains divisive is the fact that I think many fans had built up their own theories and expectations for the characters from The Force Awakens. Leading up to The Force Awakens, there was a lot of questions about, is Rey a Kenobi? Is she a Skywalker? Is she a Palpatine? And after The Force Awakens came out, it did a good job of introducing new characters, even if in, sort of a derivative formula or story akin to, A New Hope. But, it's like The Last Jedi basically took all this fan theorizing and all this stuff and was like, none of that matters. Like, don't worry about that. And I feel like that, in a way, turned off fans because it's fun to theorize and it's fun to be right, or be incredibly surprised. So, in the sense that fans were really invested in, their own theories or this stuff around the new trilogy, The Last Jedi just kind of shut all that down. And in a way, again, kind of telling the fans, like, it's unimportant and you're wasting your time. Like, don't bother with any of that. And at least, whether that's how Rian Johnson intended it, whether that's just how it was received by the fans, it does seem like that's how a lot of fans took it. So I think another major criticism of the legacy of The Last Jedi is its treatment of legacy characters, specifically Luke Skywalker. I think the problem with this is when we leave off with Luke Skywalker in Return of the Jedi, he is sort of the hopeful new Jedi. He's going to bring the Jedi back, Return of the Jedi. And he saves, he redeems his father, even though Darth Vader passes away and doesn't, honestly get to pay for his crimes. He does find the good in his father, and he, fulfills that promise of a new hope, right? He gives the galaxy hope, and they can build something better moving forward. Well, when we pick up with Luke in The Last Jedi, he's an old Kermit curmudgeon who has cut off the Force and basically everyone in his life and just gone into exile on an island. And he's not the Luke that we know, which story-wise isn't inherently bad. We have to fill in those gaps, but unfortunately, when Rian Johnson himself fills in those gaps, the gap is that he was training a new generation of Jedi, which included his nephew, Ben Solo, who apparently Luke Skywalker felt would go to the dark side, so he literally considered and actually ignited his lightsaber while Ben was sleeping and was going to slaughter him in his sleep. And this is the same guy who redeemed Darth Vader and basically saw the good in people, and he saw some bad in someone and was like, I gotta kill him. That made no sense at all, and I agree with that criticism. That's wild. Like, I don't understand why you would have that be the backstory. I'm not even upset that Luke is an old curmudgeon. Like, that's fine. I mean, maybe, Ben was an old hermit. Obi-Wan became Ben and disappeared from the galaxy. Like, you can fill those gaps in, but you got to do it logically. And I think that was just too big of a jump to go from the Luke we knew to this guy that would kill his own nephew. And it just didn't work. And to that, it sort of broke Luke's character arc. Because then it became unbelievable that he would actually exile himself and be on this island. Which this island in and of itself is where, like, the Jedi texts are. And it's like, if Luke's cutting himself off from the Force and wants the Jedi to die, what's he even doing there? And why did he wait so long to burn that tree? Right? Like, things just start to break down once you're like, I don't know. It doesn't really work. So I think, in addition to that, like, let me pull up, I have some notes here. I mean, the blue milk nipple didn't help either. The other big criticism was the Casino Planet mission, Canto Bight, that is gone on by Finn. It just doesn't work narratively because it feels so side quest. It just doesn't feel like it adds anything to the overall narrative, if that makes sense. Like, they go there, it's kind of a cool planet, and they like save some animals, and then, it's sort of this whole like, if we're gonna save ourselves, like, we have to save each other, whatever the theme is of that. But it just doesn't really work. And I don't know. I think Rose, was a fine character addition. I like the idea of Finn being a deserter. I think he's proven through Force Awakens that's part of his character arc. And I like Rose as sort of being this, upbeat resistance fighter who, is stopping people from retreating. That's cool. It's just that they don't really take her arc anywhere. And she does sacrifice herself, and Finn saves her later. She sacrifices herself, saving Finn later. And, I kind of get why she would do that. But at the same time, like, it just doesn't really feed into some of the themes that I think Rian Johnson is trying to build in The Last Jedi. You know, if I were to do anything differently, I think the first thing I would do is I wouldn't have killed Han Solo in The Force Awakens. I would have explored the relationship between him and Rey, like with Han Solo as a father figure and a mentor, and him trying to right the mistakes he made with his son. Now, I'm not opposed to Han Solo dying. I just think it should come a little bit later in the trilogy. I think that unfortunately, because he dies so quickly in Force Awakens, all we really get is a glimpse of sort of the Han Solo that he became after all the years since Return of the Jedi, and it just doesn't really get explored. It's very surface level. Well, by incorporating Han Solo into Rey's development as a character, I think she sort of has two father figures, which is interesting because Rey's parents abandoned her. So now she sort of would have an abundance of parents. Maybe Leia as a mother figure, Han as a father figure, Luke as a father figure. And she's sort of juggling these mentors and their advice. And I think it would have gone a little bit further to both Han's character development and Rey's, and given sort of Luke more to do, because in a weird way, they sort of have, instead of having Han Solo be the mentor that she's taking advice from, which might be different than Luke's advice, she's sort of in this relationship or this, I don't know, telekinesis with Kylo Ren or Ben, and she's listening to him throughout the movie, which actually works, I think. But what I think I would have Luke refuse to train Jedi, but I never would have him try to kill Ben in his sleep. It's just completely out of character. And I think you should have Han Solo die in The Last Jedi, and then Luke die early in the third act, and you would have a much more powerful narrative. So one of the things I love about The Last Jedi, I love the reveal of Rey's parents being no one and them selling her off for drinking money. I think it's a shocking revelation, and it's something that plays into the idea of all this fan theorizing, where it's shocking for us, the audience, because the fandom had been guessing since Force Awakens, what is Rey's lineage? And even more, it's shocking for her, I think even more so than it is for us, the audience, for her to hear that, because it does destroy her place in the story, the way she views her family, and of course, her self-worth. So this is actually an incredible, incredible moment in The Last Jedi that I think is done properly. It's what happens after this where I would probably go about changing something. And what I would do, I think, is I think in Rey's case, being as broken as she is from that revelation, right? It's very comparable to, Luke, I am your father from Empire Strikes Back, and the revelation that Darth Vader is Luke's father, and, Luke's, no! And then he, sort of has to reconcile everything he's known with this new, truth bomb. And Rey's sort of in a similar situation, but in the movie, she sort of follows in the footsteps of Luke, which is at that moment when she's at her weakest, Kylo Ren extends his hand and literally offers Rey to join him. And which is, again, very Darth Vader-esque. They're echoing story beats from the original trilogy. And I love the line he has where he says, "You're nothing. Like, you're nothing in this story, but not to me." And I love that line because I feel like what should happen right here is that Rey actually should join up with Kylo Ren. I think instead of just following through on the logical conclusion that she would be like, don't do this, don't go that way. I think in that broken moment, she might actually join up with him. Because at this point in the story, especially in The Last Jedi, Ben has also already gone against the First Order. He's sort of shown her a little bit of vulnerability on his side, and I think she would actually sort of believe in him. And I think the story would take a wild turn if she actually joined him. When we're talking about Empire Strikes Back, I mean, could you get any lower than the protagonist joining the bad guy? I think that would be a remarkable twist and a different take on the growth that comes with sort of being a Jedi Master. And I also like that you could draw parallels between the extended Star Wars universe when Luke Skywalker goes to train under clone Palpatine to learn more about the dark side, right? He goes there for knowledge. I think these are the stories with like Mara Jade, and essentially he ends up falling to the dark side, and Leia is the one who redeems him. And I think you could see echoes of that in this story where Rey sort of does join up with Kylo Ren and takes her place in this story. Now, for the other characters, at this point, Poe, I was not a fan of the way they used his character here, which is they sort of have him disagreeing with leadership, and they end up having him, commit a mutiny and essentially treason, and he gets stunned by Leia. And at that moment, you think like Poe should be a traitor to the Resistance. He should be imprisoned, and he should not be welcomed back. But as is the case and a big criticism in this movie, he is. His mutiny and treason is essentially forgotten. Leia and Holdo are both like, I like that one. Me too. And it just feels like, as far as character growth, they're just like, he's a leader. And he just is. Like, him questioning authority is, fine, and that's great. And he even questions Holdo for most of the time, which is another criticism of The Last Jedi, because it makes no sense, really, for Holdo to really withhold the information he's requesting. It's not like it's secret information or you need, like, top secret clearance. I get the impression she's just pulling rank and trying to teach him a lesson, but it comes across as like, well, if you had just filled him in, like, he'd probably be like, oh, okay, cool. I don't know. But instead, he's got to commit a mutiny, and, Holdo goes on to do the Holdo maneuver, which I actually like visually, and the audio of that sequence, which is pretty incredible. But unfortunately, the Holdo maneuver does put, sort of a big plot hole in the canon of Star Wars, because if all you had to do was just point ships and light speed them at each other, you would figure that have been going on for a long time. Or once you figure it out, like, how else are you going to fight star battles? You're just going to start, running things at each other in light speed. So that aside, which gets retconned in Rise of Skywalker, 1 in a million maneuver, whatever. I think what you want to do with Poe's character here is where he's sort of the destined leader of the Resistance and this hotshot ace X-Wing pilot. You do want to put him in that position where he has committed mutiny, has committed treason to essentially uphold what he believes to be their overall mission. And to that end, he should be working now from, an outside perspective on the resistance. He no longer has access to their resources. He should literally be in the brig or in jail. And I think it would be a cool storyline if people had, it'd be cool if like Finn and Rey and them had to break into the resistance to actually break Poe out of jail and bring him along for sort of their final mission, which I'm assuming would not be okayed by the resistance, and they'd be sort of operating on their own, which again, I think would be pretty cool. And then for Finn's arc, what I would do, because I talked earlier about him sort of, abandoning his post in Force Awakens, possibly abandoning Rey, I think you want to take his character all the way. Again, they sort of, in the Last Jedi, they walk all of these character arcs right up to that moment, and then they back off, right? Kylo extends his hand to Rey, and you're like, oh my God, is she really going to go with him? And then they walk it back, and it's like, no, she's not. Poe, he literally gets stunned after committing the mutiny, and you're like, oh my God, like, is he going to be, like, kicked out of the resistance? You're like, no, he's not. He's fine. He'll be the leader by the end. And then Finn. Finn walks, all the way up to, like, Benicio del Toro's character, where he's like, hey, it's bad on both sides. And you can sort of get out of this binary of like good guys and bad guys and like just hang out here in this gray area. They walk Finn all the way up to that and then have him walk back by essentially being portrayed by Benicio del Toro's character, and then Finn choosing the resistance side. But in essence, I think Finn's character would benefit from abandoning his post, from actually rejecting both sides. He was born into the First Order. He has joined the resistance. He's been on both sides. And I think if he were to see that both sides do have flaws and sort of rejects this binary, he would also be an incredibly interesting character going forward. Because like I mentioned, if they were to team up to break Poe out, they may not actually be like resistance. They're sort of operating as their own group. And that might be kind of cool, a little bit different than traditional Star Wars. And so what I would like to see is like Luke Skywalker in Rise of the Resistance, if that's what you would still call it, sort of retaking that hero's mantle as he has to bring Rey back to the light side. So I know there is this sort of discussion online about gray Jedi, and which has not really been explored in the Skywalker Saga films, and again, was not. Could be interesting if they wanted to sort of have Rey take that middle ground. You have Finn already there. And ultimately, though, they could choose the side and rejoin the Resistance, or have the Resistance join them in their final battle. But I would have loved to have seen Luke Skywalker, in the hero's role in Rise of Skywalker at the beginning, maybe teaming up with Lando, figuring out how to get in touch with Rey, and then having an actual duel. It would be pretty dope to see Luke Skywalker take on Kylo Ren and Rey. But I would have loved to see some element of that where Luke sort of, in that moment when he's taking on Kylo Ren and Rey, maybe Rey is conflicted, and you actually have Luke Skywalker sacrifice himself for Rey, which brings her back on the light side. And that would sort of be that final death that, would restore her faith on, I am on the right side. I'm not supposed to be with Kylo Ren. And for the first third of that movie, I also would have loved to have seen Rey's conflict. She is joining. She's probably starting to do some things that she doesn't necessarily agree with, right? She's going down that dark path. What does that mean? Not just a vision of herself that we get in the actual Rise of Skywalker where she sees herself as Dark Rey, but actually walking that path would be pretty cool. And then I would like to see, I'm guessing with the Resistance, right? Poe's return is that he would have to, I'm assuming just based on Carrie Fisher's death, that Leia would still pass away in Rise of Skywalker, and Poe would have to return to the Resistance and reclaim leadership of it. So I don't know if Holdo would still be there or who would be sort of the antagonist in that scenario, but I mean, she sacrifices herself, so she wouldn't be there. But I don't know who you would have there that would sort of be against Poe coming back. I think it would have been powerful if it was Leia and he sort of usurped Leia, but I know due to Carrie Fisher's death, I don't think that would ever happen. But I would have liked to see him reclaim the Resistance, and then Finn ultimately finally picking a side. And my guess is, if I were doing this right, I think Finn's character arc could be completed. Whether he has the Force or not is up for debate, but I would have loved to have seen them explore deeper his relationship with Rey. I would have loved to have seen them have him possibly make a sacrifice where he loses his life by picking a side, and then them honoring him as one of the great heroes of the Resistance and people that, essentially won this war. I think that would be incredible. So, I don't know. That's really my thoughts. Like, let me take a look here. There's other things in The Last Jedi that, don't necessarily work. I think sometimes the humor can be a little off-putting. I think it's fun. I don't like jokes that are only jokes for the audience. I like humor within the actual context of the story. So for instance, there's a scene in The Force Awakens where they have like an iron sort of come down. And that's a reference to, a fan-made film, fan fiction, Star Wars film, short film from years ago. That's a nod to the audience. The characters in story, that means nothing. And I don't really appreciate some of that stuff. So, and finally, I hadn't touched on it, but I'll bring it up. Space Leia. Of course, that was a rough moment because nothing that we know suggests that Leia would be able to, be blown up out into space, but then unconsciously use the Force to protect herself from the void of space. And then, just the image of her sort of, Leia Poppins flying through space and returning and then just sort of being fine. She ends up in a coma, which I don't know why. Maybe like the explosion rattled her head or something, but apparently if you have the Force, you can fly through space, so maybe it would fix your head. I don't know. It was just a lot of things like that sort of, I loved what they were going for. I think they walked the characters right up to those pivotal moments, but unfortunately they walked it back. My guess is, I think Rian Johnson probably wanted to go all in, but Disney was hesitant to leave their characters in that level of disarray. I think it could have been powerful. And then I think in Rise of Skywalker, you would have gotten a much stronger final act because you'd have a lot of characters that need to get from, a low point to a high point instead of just sort of walking that, straight line. I think that would have been a lot of fun. So otherwise, those are just kind of my thoughts about The Last Jedi. You know what I mean? Like, I like the movie in terms of being able to watch it. I like the idea of Broom Boy at the end and sort of, somebody else taking up the mantle of the Jedi. I do like the powers that Luke has when, he's projecting himself to fight Kylo Ren. And he ends up, it costs him his life. But at the same time, I would like some mention of some of the things because the prequel or the sequel trilogy is just wrought with, Palpatine's back. Well, how? I don't know. He's just back. It just has so many moments like that I don't think work really well. And, you look back at like the extended Star Wars universe and the level of detail that went into, Palpatine cloned himself and his clone is back and like all these things where you're like, it's never mentioned in the movies, but kind of makes sense. There's just, a lot of things like that. But I like that Rian Johnson, really went for it here and was trying to do something different. That's one of the things I love most about the prequel trilogy and what George Lucas was trying to do. He wasn't just trying to recreate the original trilogy in the same vibe. He's trying to tell a different story, different vibe. in the same world, but that was fun. I thought that was cool. And obviously the prequel trilogy has aged well. I don't know if the sequel trilogy will, but, I don't know. You can't undo it. So you got to appreciate what's there, even if it's not perfect. Try to enjoy what you can. And, I love Star Wars, so I'm always going to go. I'm always going to watch it. But that's my thoughts kind of on The Last Jedi. I'm curious what your guys' comments will be on this because, everybody had strong opinions about The Last Jedi. So, I don't even think I brought up, Snoke dies. Spoiler alert. They just kill him off. Here you think he's this emperor-level character and super powerful, and he just gets cut in half over nothing. I liked the fight scene with Rey and Kylo, even if, upon many rewatches and slow motion, you can tell that some of the choreography was a little bit off. It had a really cool vibe to it, and I did enjoy that. I like when they had the Falcon doing some cool stuff. The Porgs were kind of cool, if not a little annoying. I don't know. So anyway, that does it for our episode. Just wanted to talk a little bit of Star Wars with you guys and give my thoughts on The Last Jedi since I've never really done it and CP's never seen it. So thank you so much for tuning in. I hope you guys enjoyed a solo episode. I feel like I'm talking like an insane amount, so fast my throat is dry. So I have a lot of appreciation for CP being able to do this. Be sure to continue the conversations. You can find us at filmmakerscompass.com where we have a feed of all of our previous episodes as well as links to all of our social media at FilmComp Podcast. And then you can follow me at Big Kid Dman. So keep the conversations going. Let me know if you think I'm wrong or if I forgot anything, brutally important. But that does it for this episode. So I just wanted to say thank you again for tuning in and I hope you enjoyed. Keep watching movies and we'll be back next week.